The benefits of being bilingual. Here's one of my friend's favorite jokes. What do you call someone who speaks 3 languages? Trilingual. What do you call someone who speaks 2? Bilingual. And what do you call someone who speaks just 1? An American. Corny, right? Well, the joke is actually grounded in some truth. Only 18% of Americans can speak a language other than English, whereas 53% of Europeans can speak more than 1 language. And 99% of Latvians can speak more than 1 language. So why are we so bad at learning other languages? It has long been thought that learning a second language too young can hinder a child's intellectual development, which is part of the reason foreign language lessons start in 6th or 7th grade in many schools across the US. We now know that being bilingual actually has many beneficial side effects and grows many parts of the brain at a young age. We also know that it's much more difficult to become fluent in a language learned after puberty than a language you learn as a young child. So here are some of the many benefits and few drawbacks of acquiring a second language at a young age. Early researchers thought if a person obtained a second language too early, the 2 language systems would obstruct each other, making it more difficult to master either, and making a person worse at both languages. They were only partially wrong. Turns out one language system can indeed obstruct the other in early years. However, researchers are now finding that this process forces the brain to strengthen its cognitive muscles to resolve this internal conflict, essentially making us smarter and making our brains stronger. Researchers have found that the minds of bilinguals are better at adapting to changing stimuli than the minds of monolinguals, especially at a young age. Scientists think that's because the brain's command center, which is responsible for problem solving, planning, and directing one's attention, is more nimble in bilinguals than it is in monolinguals. So what are the drawbacks? Well, scientists say that monolinguals tend to have a wider vocabulary as children than bilinguals, and are able to more quickly access the words they are looking for. However, most bilinguals are able to catch up with vocabulary acquisition at a later age. Science has also found a few other benefits of speaking more than 1 language. One study showed that dementia set in an average of 4 years later in bilinguals than it did in people who speak only 1 language. Another showed that bilingualism is equated with a 2.8% increase in hourly wages. Aside from all that science, speaking more than 1 language is great because you can make friends with more people, which is always a good thing.
بس العربية كمان لغة القرآن.
不是因为太吵了。
Вы говорите по-русски с семьей?
بالرусском родной фарси, потому что я native тоже
يعني لازم أبدأ الابلكيشنز للجامعة. طبعا كولومبيا بس
Sasa naweza kusema ama kuelewi lugha.
I feel that language gives you something with which you can connect to another person.
अब जो अच्छा इस किताब के बारे में यहाँ पे लिखा है, ये किताब कुदरतुल्लाह शाह की खुद नविश्त है। एक और
नविश्त क्या है? Writer?
खुद नविश्त
was written.
नहीं about his own life.
Oh, okay. Oh, खुद नविश्त.
खुद नविश्त.
Yeah.
Each language is in many ways an expression of how one society or culture thinks. I feel that when I start to speak foreign languages, a lot of times I become a bit of a different person. Perhaps I say things that I wouldn't necessarily say in English. Perhaps I'm more deferential to others. Perhaps I'm more upfront about what I say.
Привет.
Здравствуйте, молодой человек.
Добрый день.
Добрый.
Как вас зовут?
Натан.
Натан.
Добрый день.
Это.
Тебя как зовут?
Привет. Я Тим.
Тим. Очень приятно.
Очень приятно. И откуда вы?
Polyglot is a word that comes from 2 Greek roots, poly and gloss, or glottis, which together means many tongues, many languages, and it just refers to anyone who speaks 3 to 4 languages or more at a pretty high level.
The term hyperpolyglot, that's the people who have a commitment to learning and maintaining a lot of languages. Most of them really put in a lot of work on it and take pride in knowing these languages.
那可以不可以养宠物？
我真的不知道。
你真的不知道？
可是如果你给我钱，你就可以。
真的吗？啊，好好好，那我得。
I'm really comfortable having a conversation on more or less any topic in French, Arabic, Hebrew, and Farsi. I think maybe a tier down would be Chinese, German, and Russian. I've done a fair amount of Latin and Greek in school, but that's obviously a different skill range for dead languages. I'm pretty comfortable speaking in languages like, Hindi or Urdu, Indonesian. With a little bit of practice, I feel, confident again in languages like Turkish, for example, or, my Italian's not so great, but I feel like I can understand it pretty well. And then there are languages that are a little bit more dormant or that I haven't studied for a while, languages such as Ojibwe or Yiddish or Wolof or Hausa, and then languages that I'm more or less a beginner in, such as Japanese and, Dutch, a couple others.
The languages that we speak as a family, it's really not that impressive. Ezra and I studied French for many, many years, so we can understand French people who are slowed down incredibly.
I lived in Hong Kong for a while. I studied Cantonese, but studying 20 hours a week for a summer, I didn't make anywhere near the progress that Tim made studying 20 hours a week, for example, Persian.
فکر میکنم که پردازش ترین بخشی از یاد گرفتن فارسی فهمیدن تاریخ و فرهنگ ایران است.
In North America, we mostly learn one language as we're growing up, and that language gets to be so good that it interferes with our learning other languages. Tim Donner's talents in the American context are extremely unusual, particularly at his young age. The hybrid polyglots one tends to hear about in the world are older as a rule. So coming up with people who've started really in high school doing this, extremely rare.
Primarily, it's the fact that, I was a bit of a history nerd. You can see in any language the entire history of a people and its interactions with others. For a while, when I was around 12 and 13, I had a very big interest in learning about the Middle East, especially the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So I thought that by learning the language, I might be able to break through the wall that's been built around it. A little bit after my bar mitzvah when I was 13, I started to teach myself Hebrew.
עברית הייתה השפה הראשונה שלמדתי אחרי אנגלית. אני התחלתי ללמוד לפני שנה וחצי.
After I learned Hebrew, I thought that, I maybe would be quite successful in teaching myself languages. So after that, I decided to try Arabic to get the other half of the equation in the history of the Middle East.
بس يعني كمان كيف العلاقات بين المسيحيين والمسلمين في مصر دلوقتي؟
ما كانش كويس مش كويس عامة مش كويس.
وحتى اليوم. I feel that by studying languages, by looking at their development, by looking at what's old and what's new, you gain a greater appreciation for society's values and for just its entire history. It's something that's a little bit hard to communicate and may sound a bit disingenuous, but that's sort of the breakthrough that I had in studying it. Their languages, you open them up to foreign cultures, to foreign ideas. And again, in the future, in a world that's increasingly globalized, you give them, a solid opportunity for more connections as they grow older. There's a quote from Nelson Mandela which goes something like, if you talk to a man in his second language, you're talking to his brain. If you talk to him in his mother language, you're talking to his heart.
आप इसी तरह से मेहनत करते रहें, इंशाल्लाह आप बहुत आगे बढ़ेंगे और मुझे बहुत उम्मीद है तुमसे और मैं बहुत खुश हूँ इस लैंग्वेज को चुना है और अल्लाह तुम्हें कामयाब खुदा हाफिज थैंक यू वेरी मच
Now on BBC Two, truth that language is power.
They call it Britain's last great wilderness, a place as beautiful as it is barren. The islands and mountains of Scotland seem to exist on the edge of the imagination. But it wasn't always like this. For centuries, Gaelic Scotland was at the heart of the Scottish kingdom. Then it changed. It became something different, something separate, something other.
You have a goal smaker Gaelic at the smaker Kurdic is time to her.
Eigenlijk is beetje wel Gaelic veel eten. Eigenlijk is beetje modern mee.
Kulsane var fjøen sånne hudas gane Gaelic. Det skjønner kiet khanene vakken julu.
In many ways, Scotland is a nation of two cultures, one Highland and one Lowland. And one part just doesn't seem to understand the other.
Most of us don't speak Gaelic, we speak English, and whether we admit it to ourselves or not, we have to view our own country through the prism of the English language. And when we go to the Highlands and Islands, we find ourselves in amongst a language and an entire culture that we don't understand, that we just don't get. It's an uneasy, uncomfortable double vision. It's Scotland's guilty secret.
These youngsters are learning Cherokee, the language of their ancestors. It's a language many of their parents didn't speak as children.
Well, I'm still learning. I'm a second language learner.
Renissa Walker is in charge of cultural preservation for the tribe. She says language is critical to the Cherokee.
Because we don't use the language in everyday living, because there isn't the transgenerational passing of the language down to children, those appropriate ways of Cherokee living are lost.
Michelle Hicks is principal chief of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. Like Walker, he is learning Cherokee.
My dad understands. He speaks some, but he only taught in bits and pieces, and so that's how I learned. And I'm still learning. I'm not fluent, but I know a lot of phrases. I know a lot of words.
Chief Hicks has made language instruction a priority, with immersion classes like these for young children. Walker estimates there are 300 fluent speakers in this population of 14,000 in western North Carolina. Little Hawk Brown learned from his grandmother.
When I was little, she always taught me the words, she sang to me. All these were just a part of my daily life.
There aren't many teens like Brown here. The majority of fluent speakers are under 5 or over 50 years old, like Walker's mother, Myrtle Driver.
I think the most important part of being Cherokee is the language. When I speak my own language, I'm speaking from the heart. When I'm speaking English, I'm speaking from here.
Cherokee became a written language in 1825 when Sequoyah, a former silversmith, developed a syllabary. That's something like an alphabet, except that the Cherokee language has 85 characters, not 26 like English. Driver wants future generations to have literature in their own language. She translated a portion of Charles Frazer's novel 13 Moons. It describes the forced migration of the Cherokee people in 1838.
He wrote it as if he experienced it. All the horrendous acts on the Cherokee people. Now we have our immersion children that will one day read it. And they'll read it in the Cherokee way, as if Grandma was sitting there telling them what actually happened.
The classes have fostered optimism among the elders that the language will survive, and the Cherokee will read it with their hearts as well as their minds. Susan Logue, VOA News, Cherokee, North Carolina.
Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, por tus olas de granos ámbar, yo piscina zakote, soy Baba.